This debate takes a close look at the choices many service providers and stakeholders must make in the pursuit of effective and efficient habilitation. While some clients with developmental disabilities may be able to participate in this process to varying degrees, the vast majority of others rely on third parties to make many, if not all, of these important decisions for them. We will discuss the potential advantages and disadvantages of allowing these clients the freedom to make more personal choices, also exploring the legal and ethical implications that impact current decision-making processes. Hello, and welcome to all of you tuning in to watch our group's debate. My name is Matt Decco. I'm an RBT from Naugatuck, Connecticut, and I will be serving as the introducer throughout this informal debate addressing the individual right to habilitation versus personal freedom. Seeing as this is an ABA-based program, much of our conversations will pertain specifically to those individuals on the autism spectrum. Some of the key features we will be addressing today involve past historical legislative events, and defined ethical implications from each side, and what the future may have in store for those prospective clients and stakeholders seeking effective treatment. I'm joined by Kayleen H. serving as illustrator, Angela W. serving as fielder, Gabby H. serving as summarizer, and Sam K. as our researcher. So thank you everyone for joining. I say we get right into it. As practitioners of ABA and budding BCBAs, we are all tasked with providing optimal levels of treatment interventions to improve the lives of our clients and stakeholders. You do this long enough and it can begin to feel like any other 9-to-5 job. And while this may be the case for many of us working in the field, the reality is the same behaviors we are targeting are not using the same time clock. With this in mind, it is important to consider how and what we ultimately decide to teach these individuals. Many of our decisions can affect our clients and others long after they age out of our programs. Long-term habilitation needs often come into direct conflict with what many would consider an encroachment on personal liberties. And this real and/or perceived conflict is what brings us here today. So before we jump into the details, I feel it would only be prudent to operationally define both what we mean by the terms habilitation as it applies directly to our targeted population, and those personal liberties each individual is supposedly guaranteed no matter their diagnosis or lack thereof. Habilitation. Val et al. Defines habilitation as a process aimed at teaching those skills needed to live as independently as possible. Furthermore, as it pertains specifically to individuals with ASD, habilitation is not only imperative to teaching skills, but also sometimes keeping or improving upon those skills across multiple environments and individual care providers. Personal liberties. As the right to habilitation may often pertain only to a specific class of individuals, those in need of it, the concept of personal liberties is far more universal and far-reaching. Now, with politics, religion, and geography aside, the inhabitants of most developed countries enjoy an enhanced sense of overall personal freedom. Specifically, here in the US, these personal liberties are protected from a legal standpoint guaranteed by the Constitution and Bill of Rights. So what does all this mean to our clients and families caught in the middle? Who and what are the other variables that can directly impact what stance takes precedence over the other? And is this topic far grayer than most even realize? Ultimately, there is an almost infinite number of moving parts to consider. What do we do when service providers have their own agenda? How do we allow individuals with disabilities the opportunity to make poor decisions that could potentially affect their overall health of learning? Opinions on the matter seem to be as varied as the possible tools available, while practitioners themselves must wade through a strict code of professional ethics, personal experiences, and preconceived notions in hopes of landing on the correct choice in the end. I hope you find this discussion both enlightening and thought-provoking. So again, thanks for joining.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Matt, and for getting us started. So now we're going to take a look at the histories of habilitation and personal liberties. So as Matt explained, habilitation is about teaching individuals with disabilities the necessary skills to be independent in day-to-day life. However, there has been a long history of mistreatment and abuse of these individuals to get where we are today in regards to habilitation. One of the most well-known cases leading to improved quality of care is the Wyatt versus Stickney case, which resulted from the inhumane living conditions that were discovered in the 1970s. The institution was treated as a dumping ground for any individual that caused problems to their families. And as the conditions were investigated, they were described to be abysmal. As a result of this horror, though, came changes in treatment of individuals with disabilities. From this lawsuit, it was declared that these individuals have a right to receive such individual habilitation as will give each of them a realistic opportunity to lead a more useful and meaningful life and to return to society. On the basis of this ruling, the court set minimum standards that included individualized habilitation plans, a humane physical environment, and assurance of enough qualified staff to administer adequate treatment. This was one of the first cases to kickstart a movement towards the right to habilitation. Since then, several state and federal legislations have been made to protect these individuals, including acts such as the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act of 1979 and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Acts like these made funding contingent on compliance with specific habilitative standards that emphasize the teaching of independent living skills as well as the provision of a safe and attractive living environment. Both of these acts remain intact today in order to protect the rights of these individuals. Another act that was created based on cases such as Wyatt v. Stickney was the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. This is better known today as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. This act was established to guarantee free education to all individuals with disabilities, which includes special education and any related services they may need. It is through education and these services that individuals will learn and acquire the necessary skills to function independently. Finally, as Bennerman et al. Stated, teaching clients how to exercise their freedoms responsibly should be an integral part of the habilitation process. It is through these laws and acts that individuals with disabilities are protected, guaranteed their rights, and provided with plentiful opportunities to learn the necessary skills to function independently.
All right, Gabby, you made a lot of great points about the laws that have been put into place to protect individuals with disabilities. We've definitely come a long way since the Wyatt versus Stickney case regarding quality of care. But who's to say whose rights are actually being protected? We need to recognize that people with disabilities have the same freedoms like ours to pursue their own good in their own ways, and that our responsibility is not to impede that pursuit. Although habilitation focuses on helping those with disabilities learn the necessary skills to be independent, many people in our society are suffering from unauthorized or unsanctioned restriction of their personal liberties. These personal liberties can be compromised in many ways by service providers who are just striving to meet the standards for habilitation. These include clients having little or no input in decisions about treatment goals or on the procedures used to teach them. Teachers or staff may teach behaviors with no regard for the client's preference or past learning in the area. Choice making is not often taught, and opportunities for choice are not often given. We have opportunities and responsibilities to take structural approaches, such as by advancing and strengthening policies that promote autonomy. We also have the responsibility to advocate by confronting those who still believe in having power over the individuals and their families, rather than sharing the power with them. As a result of the rights crusades led by parents and professional activists, those with disabilities now have the negative rights against discrimination, the positive rights that we find in IDEA and in the court's decisions about physical liberty and institutional confinement, the entitlements in the Social Security Act and the Affordable Care Act, and the system capacity development provisions in Part D of IDEA. Fundamentally, liberty is freedom of choice within the general system of laws and social values. So what does liberty mean for a person with a disability? It means protection from harm and benefiting from the research, instruction, and services of clinicians.
So as Sam said, what does liberty mean for a person with a disability? It means protection from harm and benefiting from the research, instruction, and services of clinicians. So something that is important to discuss when we're kind of looking into this topic is what harm can be caused. So I'm going to talk about the harm to individuals that are in habilitation or habilitory programs. So we've covered the history, and it's important to look at experiences. So one of the largest supporters of long-term care and providers is the HCBS waiver. That's also known as the Home and Community-Based Services waivers. This waiver refers to services such as personal assistance, day habilitation, and residential habilitation. So according to Friedman and Crabb 2018, this waiver, specifically 1915C, which addresses individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So this is a diagnosis of ID, DD, and or autism. These waivers are permitted to use restraint, restrictive intervention, and seclusion. This also varies upon state, but the majority of states do allow this. So to clarify what these various terms mean, there is a visual on the screen that shows the definitions of each, but I'm also going to verbally reiterate that. So restraint is interventions restricting movement, generally falling into 3 categories such as physical, mechanical, and chemical. So physical would be whenever there's applied force on an individual. Mechanical would be using like belts or restraints, straps, and then chemical is a pharmacological means, so medication. Restrictive interventions are limitations on a person's movements, access to other individuals, locations or activities, or restriction of a person's rights. This can also refer to the use of aversive techniques that are designed to modify a person's behavior. So seclusion is the involuntary confinement of a person in a room or in an area where the person is physically prevented from leaving. And all of these definitions were found from the article of Friedman and Crabb. So how does this relate to the argument for personal liberties? Well, as I said in the article, 75% of those waivers were permitted to use restraint or restrictive interventions. There was a smaller proportion that was identified to allow seclusion. So the use of restraint and restrictive interventions is not only physically dangerous, but mentally dangerous as well. There have been, unfortunately, several incidences in history that have led to death that have correlated with restraint and restrictive interventions. So why is this important? Well, in the VACB Ethics Code, specifically 2.15, minimizing risk of behavior change, it addresses that and emphasizes that intervention should focus on minimizing harm to clients and stakeholders. Ultimately, modifications or discontinuation should be done if there is no change that has occurred in a timely manner. So this relates directly to the use of that and how if something's not changing, it should be stopped. It's also important to consider this. Are we respecting individuals' rights to choose and allowing personal liberty if facilities can use restrictive interventions and restraint on individuals? So we can also tie this into choice and how not having choice can lead to the necessity of these interventions and restraints on these individuals. So in Fall et al. In 1996, they discussed the impact that choice has on individuals in habilitory programs. So individuals who are able to make choices have been found to attend to tasks longer, show an increase in leisure activity participation, as well as more positive behavioral outcomes. So all this was seen whenever individuals were given choices in a variety of settings and situations. This article also discusses how choice for individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities often is related to the importance of the decision and how much of an effect it will have on their life. So we're looking at if it's a big decision, more than likely they wouldn't have the choice. So let's reference Ethics Code 2.11, obtaining informed consent. Are these individuals consenting to these various facilities and habilitory programs if they are not given the choice in the matter? So tying it all together, if individuals are allowed to make these choices, there are going to be more positive behavioral outcomes. And with that, there's not going to be a need for this restraint, restrictive interventions, or seclusion, which can cause harm to these individuals.
So Keelan brought up some good points about the use of choice. And although it could be argued that the lack of choices could lead to harm, it could also be concluded that too much choice without proper training could also lead to harm. Individuals with developmental disabilities often display more difficulty making decisions about their everyday lives. Two studies by Gaeth et al. In 2016 noted that those with autism spectrum disorders take longer to make decisions and are more likely to avoid decision making. Their study found that high-functioning individuals with autism were more likely to struggle making decisions such as when to take medications, pay their bills, shower, and go to bed than those from the control group. When looking at quality of life, they found that those with autism were more likely to quit a job after a month, be kicked out of an apartment, pay rent or utilities late, and use emergency credit. These types of decisions can cause harm. Anxiety surrounding making everyday decisions can result in negative outcomes. If an individual is considered to be lower functioning, the results of these decisions could be exacerbated. For example, quitting a job after 2 months could cause a snowball effect, resulting in difficulty paying bills and ultimately eviction from the home. Confusion regarding the appropriate time or amount of medication to take could have detrimental physical effects. In these situations, it would be better to have a trusted person guide the individual through the decision-making process to prevent accidental harm. With an individual's right to habilitation, a person could be taught these skills to lead to safer independence. With sufficient teaching, an individual may even reach mastery of these skills and no longer require assistance. This also coincides with the BACB Ethics Code 3.01, Responsibility to Clients. As behavior analysts, it is our responsibility to act in the best interests of our clients by supporting and maximizing their benefit without causing harm. We have an ethical obligation to thoroughly prepare them for a less restrictive environment. Teaching activities of daily living to our clients can reduce some of the stress associated with everyday decision making to promote a happier, more independent life in the long term.
Angela, you brought up a lot of good points about decision making and what can lead to safer decision making for those related to autism. But making choices is something that everyone should be entitled to. The term choice is sometimes synonymously used with the terms control, personal control, or decision making. But whatever it's called, there appears to be a fairly strong agreement that exercising choice is desired and helpful in achieving intervention objectives, and it enhances the overall quality of life. The basic requirement for choice by people with disabilities appears to be the individual's right and entitlement to make a choice. Choice places control in the hands of the individual, which can then promote the development of positive self-image and behavior. Few opportunities are made available for choice making, even in day-to-day activities, such as where and when to eat or what time to go to bed. For choice making to occur at its very minimum, there has to be at least one opportunity available for the person to consider. At the very least, the person has to have the option of saying yes or no. Another important aspect of available opportunities is that they should be familiar. The person should be made familiar with these and have had experience with the available options. There are 4 steps to integrating choice into our daily practice. First, we need to assess the acceptance of choice within the environment. Then we need to determine ways that opportunities can be made to give choices. Next, we determine ways that freedom, initiative, and skills can be increased in choice making. Lastly, we need to increase the skills of support people and family members to encourage and support choice. Organizations that support those with disabilities also need to develop overall policies and sets of ideas for encouraging choice and putting them into place that fit with the support goals. Individualized strategies then need to be carefully planned, executed, updated, and evaluated in a systematic way.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Sam. So one of the questions we had posed was, if we had any personal experience that related to this topic. that we would like to share. And just listening to all of this and this great debate, and then kind of thinking about some personal experiences I have had. The one of the texts always revolves around going back to that code and seeing if the situation you're confronted with, how and where it applies to the code. So in this particular instance that I experienced, I found, kind of doing some of my research, that code 2.09 involving clients and stakeholders, and code 3.01 responsibility to clients applied. So many years ago, I worked with a teenage girl, so we'll call her Jenny. And despite, displaying severe tantrums at times, she was able to work for long durations in a supportive volunteer role. She had strengths in math and reading, but she really found like reading, conversational tasks and such, like extremely aversive. Her parents, as she got a little bit older and a little bit older, started to really focus more on like where her future and where they thought she would be, and they really wanted her to become fluent in like answering the telephone, taking notes, relaying messages to novel people, so on and so forth. And they were just like really dead set on her working as a receptionist in a type of office setting. So our attempts to accommodate the family would almost always occasion severe problem behavior, which was obviously a concern for ours. Jenny was capable of making concrete choices and would choose discrete jobs with clear task completion 100% of the time. So 100% of the time, if we gave her the option to do this task versus this task and this task, she would always pick kind of the same ones. She always avoided the ones that had to do with the phone and talking and so on and so forth. So this eventually led to the family allowing Jenny the opportunity to decide to work at a local greenhouse and flower shop, where she would work 2 hours straight, 3 times a week, in a very minimally supported role. So in this example, Jenny already had those prerequisite skills to decide what she preferred to do in a more positive and constructive direction, but they just weren't being considered by her family. But through effective consultation, a little bit of time, and the data collection that we were able to provide and show the result of A or B, we were able to uphold our responsibility to Jenny, while really also allowing her to be a part of that decision-making process along with her parents.
All right, thanks for sharing that experience, Matt. I'm glad that Jenny was able to find something that she was able to do for herself and enjoy. So now I'm just into the sides of habilitation and the use of choice. And so Sam did bring up some excellent points in regards to integrating choice making into daily practice. But on the other hand, when it comes to making choices, the core of habilitation is all about teaching individuals to acquire the necessary skills to make choices independently. Children with developmental disabilities should truly be taught these skills as early as possible to foster independence and autonomy later on in life. Paul Raya describes the process of habilitation as entering into a contract with clients that allows them to set an agenda for personal change, which then we as professionals have a responsibility to accept and to support that implementation. There's such a large focus on not on what clients cannot do, but who each individual client is. And through the habilitation process, client growth is truly the #1 goal. As it was described in the background and history of habilitation, as I said earlier, we've come a long way from the mistreatment and abuse of individuals with disabilities. Since then, there has been a large push in ensuring that the needs of these individuals are met and tailored to each person. Shipton and Lasherwicz describe somewhat newer phenomenon based on person-centered care and active support when it comes to teaching independence and social inclusion and self-determination. They explain that person-centered care is part of a new evolving trend to individualized care for adults with developmental disabilities that's proving to be an effective method in increasing sense of control and choice-making. These practices are aimed at facilitating meaningful social inclusion and honoring choices of adults with disabilities and/or mental health disorders through collaboration with paid caregivers, other adults with disabilities and disorders, and their family members. Furthermore, in a study conducted by Wiggum et al., it was concluded that as a result of person-centered care, adults with disabilities reported feeling a greater sense of control and choice in their lives. With that idea of person-centered care comes that idea of active support. So going back to that study by Shipton and Lashowitz, staff was trained to design and implement activities and programs that were directed at enhancing the residents' experiences. And the two key concepts that were identified in supporting adults making their own decisions included, first of all, just being understood, and second, experiencing security and freedom in their living environment, which included adequate expertise and resources to accommodate any medical and mental health needs. So that overall idea of habilitation in regards to making choices is just all about creating conditions that maximize the probability that the individual will do for himself or herself that which he or she already has the skills to do.
Yeah, Gabby, so going back to about those two key concepts that you discussed. So experiencing security and freedom in a living environment, and also including adequate expertise and resources to accommodate any medical and mental health needs. I think those two key concepts are a good way to kind of funnel into technology and what's been brought up in the most recent years with technology. So modern day technology is amazing. Not only do we have all these cool gadgets that make day-to-day life easier, we also have created new technology that helps support those with skill deficits to live more independently and successfully. There are many of these, but a new and emerging idea within this realm is remote support services. So remote support services, which is offered in some states, so only 18 as of right now, as a Medicaid waiver supported service. These services help individuals with intellectual and related developmental disabilities who do receive long-term services and supports. So in a study by Tassi et al. 2020, they conducted a study to assess barriers and the appealing aspects of this type of support. So half of the individuals in this study did indicate that they felt more independent with these remote services. Their second biggest reported pro to this service was the interaction with that remote support staff online. So not only did these participants in the study report feeling like they had more privacy, but they also mentioned that they had made progress and were able to live life with their disabilities in a less intrusive manner. So although this is still a form of rehabilitation, providing more individuals with this avenue as a choice helps them live a more quote unquote normal and independent day-to-day life. This change in the topography of a typical day or residential rehabilitation could be of benefit to various individuals who are having to use these supports. And this also can kind of go into COVID. So one of our questions was, how have the recent world events associated with the COVID-19 pandemic impacted this topic? So rehabilitation and personal liberties and autonomy. I think remote support services is a great example of that. So if we look at just in the workplace, a lot of us went remote. We were no longer in our community office with our coworkers. We were at home and we were working, and we were expected to do the same level of work, right? And shifting online, yes, for some it was not as successful, but for others, it led to this huge success, and it's honestly changed the workforce for the better. So there are several companies and places now that are switching to allowing fully remote employees. So I think it's important to kind of look at that and also look at this remote services option, especially for rehabilitation, and for individuals who want a less intrusive option and want more choice and want more freedom and want their personal liberties and autonomy to be respected. I think it's important to look at the impact that COVID has had on the workforce and look at it in terms of support services, because ultimately it's their day-to-day too. That's what they're doing daily. So I think it's important to compare the two and think of the outcomes that really could come, the benefits that it could have for the individuals that we serve.
Yeah, thanks, Kayleen. I mean, I just COVID in general, I think if we, had to find some silver lining there, it might have been that it did really, push to the forefront the technology that I think a lot of us had and just didn't even really consider. or take advantage of, from a remote learning standpoint, consultation. I mean, really just all kind of fell in our lap. And, fingers crossed with things going in a more positive direction. I think we still see the benefit from these types of technologies that are available, and it can really bring habilitation and consultation and all of this stuff to people that, maybe otherwise would not have been able to receive it because there's not a BCBA anywhere near them or whatever the case may be. But yeah, it really threw a wrench in the gears. But even just simple things like having more readily available internet and more devices in everybody's pocket or, in their home helped a lot of families maintain some level of service during those shutdowns. On another note regarding technology, I've kind of been around long enough to remember when only a few students had some type of early touch-to-speak device. And you go back, and I remember from some of the parent talks and meetings, and some of these things cost upwards of $5,000 or more. But now it seems like every student has their own personal iPad. You couple a $200 app with a $800 device, and they're off and communicating and talking, and it's just opening up so many more avenues. So who's to say, where we all would have been during that COVID shutdown without also things like that Google Classroom, Zoom, things of that nature. So these technological advances, along with increased funding, have really opened the door for greater possibilities in regards to kind of how we think about treatment and consultation. As we're no longer limited in a lot of ways by the physical distance between ourselves and our clients.
As both Keelan and Matt mentioned, technology has greatly impacted treatment, especially with the arrival of COVID-19. A review of 55 studies by Ellison et al. In 2021 determined that several studies have shown the advantage of telehealth for those with ASD during the pandemic. Diagnostic testing, speech services, and parent training were successfully implemented with video conferencing and with high fidelity. Telehealth and video conferencing has been a convenient way to prevent the disruption of services for those who need it, allowing clients to learn new skills needed for independence. Not only has technology increased availability of services for those in need, but there's also been an increase in funding to offset the cost of services. According to Friedman in 2016, the need for day and employment services has increased substantially, more than doubling since 1988. And thus the need for funding has also increased. In the fiscal year 2014, more than 81% of intellectual and developmental disabilities agency funding went toward day services. Medicaid, home and community-based services waivers were the largest source of public funding for day services in 2009 and continued to be one of the largest providers of long-term support for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the United States. In fact, between 2002 and 2013, HCBS waiver spending for day and work programs more than doubled, going from 27% to 68%. And in the fiscal year 2014, day habilitation services were expected to receive $5.62 billion in funding. Day habilitation programs are intended to teach necessary skills to help participate in socialization, activities of daily living, and ultimately making appropriate choices for themselves. With the increase in funding, more individuals will have access to services that promote more independent living.
Exactly. Yeah. So ultimately, in the end, what is the takeaway from all of this? So I think if after hearing us speak, if you're like me and rest of the group, it should seem blindingly apparent, that great strides have been made to better accommodate both sides of this dilemma over the last few decades. But like other aspects of the field of ABA, there's still more work to be done. Culturally progressive successes, legal victories, and technological advancements, both past and present, are pointing to a real and palpable paradigm shift as to how we view and serve individuals with disabilities. That being said, the ethically minded practitioners of today certainly have their work cut out for them. You know, as many of these advancements, quote unquote, also come with some unforeseen and unfortunate consequences as well. The sad reality is, you know, not all people are accepting. Not everything on the internet is true, and not all budgets are created equal. According to the CDC, the prevalence of autism spectrum disorder has increased exponentially in the United States. And there are many variables to consider when picking apart these data as to why that number, you know, those numbers appear to be growing in such a manner. But the fact remains that long-term care and habilitation will continue to be a necessary service requirement impacting families, districts, and states to come. With this in mind, it's imperative that we, current and aspiring BCBAs, facilitate safe passage for all those we come into contact with throughout our professional careers in the pursuit of finding the perfect balance between habilitation and choice amongst those we service. So, you know, on our slides as well, we've got some relevant codes that we also thought applied to this particular conversation and debate. And I really hope, you know, whoever listens, you know, gets a lot out of this and takes away some interesting, thought-provoking, you know, ideas and thoughts. So thank you for joining. Thanks for listening. Thanks to my group, and have a good one.